Yeah, that's what I wanted to say hello. And Leslie Higgins, you're doing well.
I'm doing very well, thank you. Thank you for all the support, the prayers, and the card, and all the things.
And Joe Lynn goes to that surgery
Next Wednesday.
verily next Wednesday.
Verily, verily it is.
Verily. Like, anything else for the good of the whole? Before we get started,
Must be the hit of the summer.
Where I wanted to start today was something that I mentioned in the sermon on Sunday.
Which was so good.
Well, thank
Yes.
you. You know, I do think on the 4th of July, for me, every year, it is both an opportunity to give thanks for the gift of being born and raised in this country. You know, when we were singing our final hymn
Oh, I love
on Sunday, which I love so much, I'm thinking about my Welsh relatives and being over in Wales where the sky is blue and the mountains are wonderful, and they're very proud of their history too. So I think one can be, you know, incredibly grateful and even prideful of being an American, and yet hold that as being, you know, one of sisters and brothers in other countries as well. But it also forces me to think, what does it mean, both positively and as a challenge, to live out my discipleship to Christ in the context of America? And what responsibility do I have as an American Christian to be involved in the wider world of politics and thought and all of that? So for me, one of the things that I'm most grateful about being out of a Reformed theological perspective is we have a theology of politics within our tradition. And it's not, you know, the Amish, which I grew up near, that, you know, we're retreating from the world. It's engaging, but how do we engage that? And how do we understand ourselves as part of this commonwealth that is ours? So I'm finding myself really appreciating this book, seeing different perspectives of how people are engaging that out of a much narrower perspective than what I bring to the table. And yet knowing that some of us are along that continuum, and you know, there are different people that we respond positively to and negatively to. And there are people who we support tremendously, yet we can acknowledge had shortcomings in their leadership as well. One of those places, I think, I think George H.W. Bush was maybe the most qualified president that we've had as far as all of his jobs before he became the president. And I do think what he did in pulling together an international coalition at the first Gulf War, historians will look at that as an absolute marvel of diplomacy and vision of the world. But in part because of his dependency on, you know, support for the religious right, his policies toward AIDS during that period, I think will be judged by history and found wanting. So, you know, there's good and bad probably in all of these leaders, but I think we need to, I am grateful that the author is helping us to look at also what are these kind of connections behind the scenes of these interlocking boards of folks, and also I wrote in one of my marginal notes, follow the money. You know, how money is getting involved, and you know, we're in all of that. So
yeah, I'll have to say that for this 4th of July, because of a lot of this, I was very, very conflicted with celebrating.
Yeah,
Very, and I see all these posts on social media, oh, yay for us, and I'm like, I don't know, we have a long way to go.
I had a
Long
different-
way to go.
I actually had a different experience, and my experience was, I watched the Capitol
Hmm.
for a while, and then I watched Nashville's,
Hmm.
and I thought, it was almost so much over the top, like what anxiety underneath is driving
Oh,
this huge display.
interesting.
And certainly, the length of ours here, keeping up with the Joneses, we're gonna have a bigger, longer, better. And I don't know what the cost was, but certainly there are needs in the city that would cry out for some of that largesse.
I
Um,
agree.
And almost how much is too much, kind of a deal, but
I was overwhelmed looking at it everywhere.
Yeah.
Thinking, who there has a weapon?
Oh,
And
amen.
I really thought,
sure.
16 now shooting her.
Were there really? Thank you for, yeah, I didn't see that, but, yeah. Ken?
Well, one of the things that we thought, and I've been thinking about is, what does it mean to be a patriot?
Right, yeah.
One of the things that bothers me is that we're excellent at standing up at a baseball game and
Yeah.
singing the national anthem ahead of time. Yeah, which I'm not a big fan of the national anthem anyway, I wish we did. God bless America, America the beautiful, anyway. Versus paying our taxes, and if you
Yeah.
really like this country, it seems to me, put some money in the coffer and be happy to be paying that.
Yeah.
And yet, most of the political talk is about cutting taxes and making sure you salute the American flag.
Right.
It's sort of trivial to me, and I get conflicted about what it means to be a patriot.
Yeah, thank you.
I love acknowledging the soldiers and who are serving, but there are a lot of federal government workers who are working very hard. People in the Veterans Administration that are working for the government.
Yep.
People in Washington DC who are paid lower than what they might be getting elsewhere.
Yeah.
And yet, those people often tend to be belittled, at least the ones working in Washington.
Yeah.
And I get conflicted about what it means to support this country.
Yeah, thank you.
Amen.
Just to follow that up, what gets me is, I see these ads for the Wounded Warrior Project. And of course, your dad was a wounded vet of the Second World War. I think if we cared, we would be grateful to have our taxes go to care in meaningful ways to support our wounded veterans. Don't ask for a handout from folks. If we ask everybody to go and do that, then we have a responsibility, it seems to me, as a nation, to care for them. I'm with you, yeah.
We don't even really support our troops. I mean, when David and I were in 29 Palms, 20 years ago, as officers, we could live off base, so we did. And the enlisted quarters were barracks, and this is the desert heat. It was 125 in the summer. It was like a rock. And a lot of the enlisted and their families lived in housing without air conditioning.
Oh, my
And
God.
David would see patients, and they would have young children, some of the enlisted, get married when they were teenagers. And one of the kids might have asthma, and if that were the case, they would get away with writing a prescription that they'd be allowed to move into one of the housing units on days that had
Basically,
air conditioning versus a swamp cooler. And I don't know if you've ever used a swamp cooler, but we tried. And it only cools your place down about 20 degrees. So when it's 120, the temperature inside your home is about 100 degrees. And it's miserable. And that's because that's how we house our young people. And most of them qualify, the younger, and qualify for food stamps because we don't pay them that much. So like, if we put all this money in the military budget and we pump ourselves up as being patriotic, but we're really not supporting people. And like Dr. Haney, mentioned, it's hard to feel patriotic when, you try to claim you're doing something in support of a certain population or a certain ideal, and then you dig beneath the surface and look at what's really happening, and it's not, it resembles nothing like what people are trying to say. Oh, we support our troops, really? So why are we putting 18-year-olds in barracks, under air conditioning and not paying them enough to eat and sending them overseas to fight for spurious wars? That was my feeling 20 years ago, and I feel like now, today, we make similar kinds of decisions where we champion something, but are we really championing people and humanity? I would positively.
Thank you.
Real said.
Yeah. I heard John speak one time, and they were talking about some event that happened. And I don't remember which one it was, but they kept saying, we're better than this. And he finally said, no, we are not better than this. We have never been better than this, but we can. And that gave me more hope
Right.
than anything that I heard anybody say when he stood up and said, no, we're not better than this. We never have been better than this.
Yeah.
But we can be.
Hello, Kay Hall, welcome. Hello, Mary Evelyn Jones, welcome. Let's go ahead and get into this. Chapter 7, The Greatest American Hero. And there's Dana Jean Brooks. Hello, Dana Jean. Ollie North fever. Gosh, I had this is bringing stuff back that I had sort of repressed.
Yeah. I can see why.
And some which I didn't remember, like even as he faded from view among the general public, North's stature only increased among conservative Christians who are hungry for a hero of their own. And I hadn't realized that Falwell had picked him up and made him kind of a poster boy in his community, but not just a poster boy, but a opportunity for fundraising, right? Middle of 119. Months later, Falwell was distributing $25 audio tapes of North's commencement address, his freedom message, and fundraising letter sent to supporters. Falwell framed what was at issue. My judgment, petty partisan politics have made Ollie North, his family, and the very lives of the Nicaraguan freedom fighters pawns in a liberal campaign to humiliate President Reagan. Critics accused leaders like Falwell of exploiting North in order to reap a financial bonanza in their direct mail campaigns. Falwell's spokesperson refused to say how much his campaign had brought in, but he wasn't the only one cashing in on North. LaHaye's Concerned Women for America offered a beautiful full-color picture of North being sworn in at Iran-Contra for a mere $20 contribution. The rise of this direct mail-in and the campaign, I think, are really significant and a little bit later, pretty subversive.
Well, and I think that's a surprise in the whole thing to me was this making it an industry.
Right, yeah.
I never thought of that way, but here's why.
Yeah. Like I said, follow the money is a good things. I hadn't realized, I'm over on 120, the paragraph at the bottom, North's commission had been in jeopardy because of injuries he had sustained in a car accident. So all of that, then over at 121, Ollie was popular with the studs because he was their image of what Marine Corps was about. He invented Rambo before Rambo made the movie. He was creator of his own meth.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
Every year, the Boy Scouts
here do a huge luncheon that raises tens of thousands of dollars. Now it's bringing in a speaker, 10 years or so ago, long after Oliver North was a speaker. Oh my God. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
and, you know,
I wonder what his fee was.
No doubt.
Yeah, it may have brought in a lot of money, but how much did they pay?
you know, and again, I want to say one of the badges likely your sons got was the God and Country Award. Right. And I've had to work with young people over the years to help them in achieving their God and Country Award. So, you know, there is something that we want to say, you know, what might be laudable about that?
Right.
And then also, how can it be, you know, manipulated in ways that are, you know, problematical? Yeah. I also totally forgot that it goes on to William Buckley.
Yeah.
William F. Buckley, it makes me want to do my William Buckley impersonation.
Very languid.
Yeah. At the bottom of that long paragraph in the middle, 121, families shouldn't be made to feel that sons and husbands were coming home as war criminals. Marines had in fact shown remarkable restraint. North believed in America and the sanctity of its commitments. He was furious that politicians and peaceniks were getting in the way of military doing what it needed to be done. I may have mentioned a couple of weeks ago, I had two cousins who served in Vietnam in '68, and one was a captain in a military intelligence unit that worked with the Montagnards up in the Highlands. And the other was a door gunner, an 18-year-old door gunner on helicopters. And the younger of the two, my cousin Jerry, is the one, Lockheed, who lives over in your hometown. This is what I just read is absolutely his position to this day. And 78 North experienced personal religious transformation. I think all of this is very interesting, and the notion that chain of command can sort of make that happen. Some of you might remember, and we may come upon it in another chapter, but there was a major issue out at the Air Force Academy about you know, the kind of hyper evangelicalism that needed to be there if you were going to be kind of connected, and really problem. Yeah. All right.
Hey, Guy. This
Yeah.
is Lokiel.
Yeah.
Can I say something?
Yes.
All right. Hey, Susie. No, I'm going back to where we talked
I don't
about.
know what to do here.
Yeah, I'm going back to that long paragraph at the end on page 121. Families shouldn't be made to feel that their sons and husbands were coming home as war criminals. So probably the majority of us in participating in this discussion today, you know, we remember the Vietnam War. We remember that. And I can appreciate a piece of what that sentence says, because the guys who were, and some of the women, but the guys who were drafted, you couldn't get out of the draft. You were drafted. A lot of them were, some were volunteers, but you were drafted. And the ones who weren't drafted, they had the opportunity probably to be in college. They had some opportunities that not everybody had. So, you know, I think our history has been, and our future will be, there will always be conflict about war.
Right.
And there will always be two sides that have valid points. But I can remember those guys coming home and they were vilified.
Yep.
And they had been drafted. Sheppy, Your
I was
husband
married to one
probably-
of them. I do
Yeah,
remember.
exactly.
Yeah.
I had a friend ask him, we went to a do at my school. That was long after we moved to Durham. And we got in the car after this event, which Dick was not crazy about going to because he had to put on a tuxedo. And we got in the car and he said, I'm never going to another DA auction. And I said, why not? He said, do you know what that girl next to me asked me? How many babies I'd burned? I mean, I think there is that thing that happened, and we do know that My Lai did happen and people did get killed. And Dick had an incident when he was over there when the guys in his unit had lost somebody and they wanted to take revenge on a village. And Dick said, had I not had the grounding I had, I might have gone along. But I said, no, we're Americans. We don't do this kind of thing. These are old people and children. We are not going to hurt anybody. We're not going to burn down their huts. So, I mean, it took the kind of, I mean, Dick had already been to college and, you know, had his master's degree by then. So he kind of went in, but he was drafted and his parents wanted him to run away to Canada and he didn't do it.
Thanks, Lakil. I think that's important. And I think, you know, in the circle of these two chapters, we need to remember, and I need to, you know, express how the first Gulf War, you know, there was a kind of a celebration at America's military prowess. And, you know, there was a very clear righteous cause. Here we have, you know, Saddam Hussein going into Kuwait, all of that, and to see how effective and, you know, well done that was. There was a sense, well, America, you know, military's back. The long shadow of Vietnam is over, and then there was sort of jealousy at, you know, these troops coming home. And I can remember being in DC when they came home and there was a major parade, and a lot of Vietnam vets who I knew were like, boy, we were never treated that way. And so I think you're right, and thank you for raising that.
We did get free tickets to Disneyland.
There was
I
something.
do remember that.
Over on 124, bottom of 123 and 24. Again, you know, these people behind the scene, with the help of direct mail strategist Richard Viguerie, remember me telling you last week, keep following that name, who provided him with select lists of conservative voters. North targeted key demographics: anti-gun control, pro-life, school prayer, strong defense, anti-gay, and the like. All told, North brought in around 16 million in a single year through direct mail alone in an unprecedented haul. Conservative political operative Ralph Reed, another name, followed him along, described North's appeal in this way: hard politics is having the right friends, but an important part of politics is having the right enemies. Conservative Christians loved him for the enemies he made. His strategist and pollster explained his appeal in the words of country singer Garth Brooks. North appealed to the hard hat, gun rack, aching back, overtaxed, flag waving, fun loving crowd. I think that's a really, really keen insight. Further along in that same page,
Guy,
yeah,
I want to go back to the wars just a minute. I'm sitting here feeling so much closer to World War II
right,
than to the later wars.
right,
And it was such a difference.
right,
I mean, it's a total different attitude.
right.
And maybe it's because we were attacked ourselves, but when I read this, it just hits me.
Yeah.
How different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I, you know, I think that there are many different reasons for that. I think clearly, you know, there was 3 identifiable kind of bad men in the world with Hitler and Tojo and Hirohito and Mussolini. Fascism was what fascism was. There was, this deep sense of what was at, but everybody in the United States was involved. Right,
You're all, everybody.
Everybody was.
To defend this country.
right, everybody was, and,
Anything-
even if you were a conscientious objector, you were involved in medicine or something like that. And I do think one of the things that worries me, and Wakil, to your point, there were issues during Vietnam with the military because of the draft and the folks who were in the military that really didn't want to be there. And so we went to an all volunteer army. Well, we also know that many people volunteer for the army because that's one of their, only economic opportunities for advancement and everything. I don't want to belittle that, but that's true. But I think if we're going to heal some of the divides in the country, everybody's got to give skin in the game. We're off the book for a minute, but I'm not in favor of the military, but I am in favor for mandatory conscription service for 2 years for everybody. Everybody, I don't care if you're a judge's son, like I was, I could have gotten a deferment, I'm sure. Everybody's got to do something. And I think the mixing of races and the mixing of regions and all of that, we need to figure that out. European countries do this, lots of countries do this. It could be, you could do CCC kind of stuff. There are ways to expand this, but I think running the military only on folks who are wanting to go is not a good process anyway. I worked going to school in DC and then serving at church there. I had tremendous respect for the military and folks who are leaders in the military. It's not just all what we think of hawks and all of that kind of stuff. It's there are a lot of people of great honor and morals in the military, but how is the military also getting influenced by some of these wider cultural issues? And we're seeing in these chapters how some of that took place, right? Okay. I wanted to bring your attention to the bottom of 124, this Edwin Louis Cole, Lewis Cole. We'll see that. Who remembers who Amy Semple McPherson is?
Oh, yes. Carol Busey would know, she taught me.
Yeah, so how many of you ever read Elmer Gantry? Or know that book or that movie? Okay, Burt Lancaster, right? Didn't he play Gantry? Well, the woman evangelist in that movie was patterned after Amy Semple McPherson. She had a major evangelical revival ministry out in LA. And in fact, they built her this big temple. And all this theatrical stuff would come in. She'd come out dressed in this long flowing gown and just hold her hand up until the entire 10,000 people grew silent. I mean, she is really important. A lot of sort of mass revivalism and evangelical stuff comes out of Southern California. She was one of those really important players out there. Just Google her today when you get home. She's very, very interesting. All right, but Cole is all about live the life of maximized manhood. Men had three purposes: to guide, guard, and govern. Wow. This role needed to be both tender and tough. I'm not taking this home to Amy to read, by the way. A certain ruthlessness. Okay,
That I found interesting in all the, male leadership stuff, but it seems like the women are the ones that are getting a lot of this done. Phyllis Schaffer, and you just keep hearing about one woman after another, and yet they call for sort of male dominant
yeah,
households, and I'm like, that's not how they live their lives.
yeah, but you do know, Carolyn, that behind every great man,
Well,
you know, is a woman pushing him over a cliff. I mean, it's, yeah, it's,
what's like Phyllis Schaffer, do we know her?
what happened to her?
No,
No, her husband.
You just know about her.
I think he was pretty supportive of it.
Yes, she always say.
Yeah. He said he allowed him to speak.
Yeah.
Like when she gives speeches, she
No,
didn't
thank you. I didn't allow you to do that.
Oh,
Yeah.
And meanwhile, he was a pretty successful businessman, I seem to remember.
Yeah.
On 125 toward the bottom. Tragically, however, a pernicious anti-hero syndrome plagued the nation. What do you think about that?
Heaven's calling.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mary.
America, well, here, women, children, churches, and nations all needed masculine decision. America was great only when its men were great.
But I was thinking some of the, like the movies for this period do have anti-heroes, right? Thinking, The Graduate,
Yeah.
the,
That's an all-time.
Dustin Hoffman, made an entire career pretty much being
Yeah.
anti-hero.
Yeah.
Right? So we see some of that anti-hero stuff coming up in the culture. And again, some of these things are responding differently to the anxiety caused by, the rise of feminism, the different economic shifting, some of these major factors, Vietnam, all of this. Now we're moving beyond that period into the 80s, and things are a little bit changed. But I thought, that there's some of this anti-hero syndrome, and trying to figure out what does masculinity look like. Another person I thought of was Hawkeye in MASH, right? Who didn't like Hawkeye, but is he the traditional
Yeah, no.
strong male guy? So we see different sides of this in the culture, trying to figure all of this stuff out. For Cole, I'm on 126. Cure for anti-hero syndrome could be found in Christian broadcasting. Christian media could offer godly heroes for popular consumption. And then all of a sudden, and during the 80s, a series of televangelist sex scandals felled a number of popular Christian preachers and rattled evangelicals who thought they had the corner on moral values. Boy, there's an understatement of the revolution.
It's that one that wept on television, was somebody that confessed his sins and wept. Do you remember
Jimmy
that?
Swaggart, I think it was. Wasn't that Swaggart?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So.
his cousin's Jerry Lee Lewis.
Right, exactly, yeah. So I had forgotten this over on 127. By 1980, the Christian Broadcasting Net was pulling in over 50 million. CBN didn't air exclusively religious programming. In the late 70s and early 80s, it expanded its secular offerings to include traditional family programming, like reruns of Westerns and shows like Leave It to Beaver and The Brady Bunch. In 74, the Bakers established PTL, and revenues of 129 million, employed 2,500 people, and went to Heritage USA, Christian Disneyland. Anybody ever go there?
Oh, but it's still going.
No, it's not going, but I've driven through the campus. Because it was outside of Charlotte. And what did it say in here, that it was the third most popular amusement park in the country?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't know it was that big.
Oh, man, that was crazy. I remember a man in my first church was so excited to go up and visit. And he was, watching a lot of television at home and watching a lot of PTL and the rest. And then poor Jessica Hahn, remember all of that, and, so Schwager behind this, bringing down a couple of them, and then thou who protestest too loudly, falls himself. And then the second time, the Lord told me, that's flat, none of your business. Okay. That,
How was the Pentecostal? That Paul didn't share the Baker's Pentecostal.
yeah, so in one of the former chapters, we had talked to, she had mentioned how Pentecostalism and the kind of Baptist have gotten into bed over convenience rather than over doctrine. And the Pentecostal is probably a little more expression of their faith in spirit driven. I think Baptists were probably a little more buttoned down. I'm not doing a really good job of explaining the difference because I tend to group all of them over in at a camp that's different than ours, but what is interesting is Pentecostalism historically had a place for women in leadership.
Don't they speak in tongues?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is speaking in tongues and very much the more highly visible demonstrations of the Holy Spirit.
And the women don't cut their hair because it's the crown of glory, and so the hair is very long, very elaborately done. When Chuck and I were first married, we lived over at Jackson, Tennessee, and there were very active Pentecostal congregations over there. And you can see the Pentecostal women coming a mile away, literally. Because it was piled high and low.
Well, you need to tease it up closer to Jesus.
Yes, right. Close to God.
That's, yeah. The televangelist soap operas of the 1980s were catnip for the national media. I'm on the middle of 128. That seemed to delight in the hypocrisy of conservative Christians. Sex, church secretaries, fraud, intrigue, prostitution, conspicuous consumption of the most tawdry sort. The revelations tarnished the image of evangelicalism generally, revealing the dark side of the religious movement driven by celebrity. Underline that, driven by celebrity. Very important. And quite honestly, I don't care where you are on the theological spectrum. Whenever you have celebrity issues, it's going to be problematic. Evangelicals have long framed sexual immorality as worldly sin, the product of secularism, liberalism, feminism. That is something that happened outside the Christian fold. Yet the televangelist sex scandals revealed that their own religious heroes had feet of clay. If Christians needed many heroes, Christian broadcasting was coming up short. The canonizations of Oliver North can be understood against this backdrop. Thought that was really, really helpful.
Just was thinking about 1970s. I think we had 3 television networks,
Right.
and now I can stream 500 million, maybe.
Yeah.
Were the Christian broadcasting networks the first ones to add? I mean, did they usher in this wave of new television networks, or were there other? I remember PBS as an early one, maybe Fox, but can't remember whether the Christian broadcasting networks started the wave of.
I don't know if they started the wave or jumped on, but they got on pretty early. And, I think it was about 1980 when ESPN, and famously their belief was somebody would watch bowling at 2 o'clock in the morning. You know, I was thinking of that great Bruce Springsteen song, 57 channels and nothing on. But yeah, I mean, this proliferation of media outlets. And then a little bit later, talking about the FCC taking away a fairness doctrine. It would actually be interesting to get our member Debbie Tate, who was on the FCC, in to talk about some of that history. I can't remember how long she was on, but I know when I came in '06, she was on the FCC. Yeah, Carol?
Just share with the group in the late eighties and early nineties. I worked at Thomas Nelson Publishers in the HR department, and they were the world's largest Bible publisher, but then they had a lot of other divisions that did books and study guides. And it was very interesting. A lot of fun people worked there, and my group was great, but there a lot of these authors they're talking about were clients, and I'd hear, I don't know, I didn't hear anything scandalous, but it always just had that kind of seedy feel, not with everybody, but with just a few stories I heard. So it was kind of eye-opening to see it from the business standpoint, not just the let's spread the gospel standpoint. And
Right.
it was kind of eye-opening.
Yeah, and again, you know, you're working with Tom and Nelson, which historically was a Methodist, wasn't it? Am I remembering that correctly?
Well, the origins of the company were in England 200 years ago.
Right.
So it had a lot of divisions that each kind of had a different personality, but they, for a while, were one of the only publishers of the Revised Standard and then the New Revised Standard Bible. So,
Yeah.
you know, books in the church that were printed.
Right. And in a previous chapter, we talked about the rise of, you know, where is this stuff being distributed from?
Right.
And the rise of Christian bookstores and all of that became an industry in and of itself. Yeah,
Right.
thank you.
Big business.
And again, I'm now on 129, the middle of the page, but it was James Dobson who would play the most critical role in cementing ties between evangelicals and the military. And General Wickham spearheaded the campaign to save the family, and Dan Coates of Indiana and Frank Wolf of Virginia, and all of that. And you want to say, on the one hand, you know, if I'm a general and I'm seeing lots of folks coming into the military who, you know, come from fractured families, and, you know, how do you strengthen? And I'm grabbing at stuff, and so I'm finding this that looks good. You know, I want to try to give folks the benefit of the doubt. And again, I've served churches where Dobson was a steady stream of, you know, what was popular in the young families classes to try to, you know, help us figure out what to do with these children.
We had stuff that came in here because that was when I was supposedly figuring out the resource room. And there was a lot of stuff that came in. And,
Yeah.
a lot of it. I don't remember any Sunday school classes focusing on that, but to me it was so bad that it would be hard
to
not
justify
to
allowing
look
it.
at it,
Yeah,
not to
yeah.
reject it.
All right, anything we want to say about this with Dobson and the military? Over on 131, Wickham wasn't the only military leader to promote evangelical teaching. In 1985, the Officers Christian Fellowship magazine, Command, published a special issue, The Christian Commander, urging officers to use their positions of influence for evangelistic purposes. None other than Marine Colonel John Grinnells, all North supervisor in '78, wrote an article about his longstanding practice of evangelism in command. 85, that was a year I would serve, 84, 85. a church in Arlington and had members of my congregation who were serving in the Pentagon. And I was regularly playing racquetball at the POAC, the Pentagon Officers Athletic Club. And so, I mean, reading this is really putting me in touch, as I imagine is with some of you, with periods of your own kind of history and development.
Hey, Guy.
Yeah,
Low kill again. I think most of y'all know that Joe had a career in the National Guard.
yeah,
And so, and he would serve at one weekend out of every month. And on Sundays, they always had the opportunity to go to a worship service. And it was, I guess is the right term, ecumenical. Because I mean, he heard a Jewish rabbi preach, you know, all different types. There wasn't, what I'm trying to say is there was not, during that time, during when he was serving and where he was serving, there was not just the promotion of the Christian value or the
Right.
evangelical value.
right. Yeah, or even a particular kind of Christian.
Yeah,
that-
that's what I was trying to say. Yeah.
You know, some of you know that I had an intern from Belmont a year or two ago, Elizabeth Snyder, who is now up in Rhode Island in a naval chaplaincy's course. She's just finished her first year at Princeton Seminary, went through officer candidate school, is a commissioned ensign now in the Navy, but she sees her ministry as a naval chaplain. And some also remember a Sunday school class I had with my dear friend Margaret Groom Kibben, who ended up being the chief of naval chaplains. So of all Marine and Navy, as a 5'4" woman, vice admiral, and she is now the chaplain of the House of Representatives. I think, you know, we need not abandon that particular ministry, because there are plenty of people who need care in that morally challenging environment of the military.
But I think it depends on the way it's presented. It's one thing to have a Navy chaplain available to you. It's another thing for a commanding officer.
Yeah, exactly,
Invite the people.
Exactly. right, right, exactly.
Have you ever had to counsel or anyone, a military commander who is devotedly Christian, and discuss the command to go out and be a disciple to all nations and to spread the word versus the United States, the freedom of religion, where people get the chance to choose? It seems to me that's a major conflict for those people who may not be able to do both.
Yeah, you know, I'm the first thing that came to mind is one of the only times that I've been rebuked by a parishioner for my theology was by a Navy commander who was stationed at Great Lakes up in Chicago, and was a member of my church in Illinois. And in a Bible study, I said that I believe in Christmas because of Easter. I believe in the miraculous incarnation birth of Jesus to Virgin Mary, because on the third day he got up again. Bonhoeffer says, once you know the who, the how doesn't matter. And so for me, I get into a belief about the miraculous incarnation through what I believe the veracity of, he took me to task. No, they're both equal. You are teaching heresy at this point. It's like, brother, you know, stand down. I'm not saying I don't believe in the virgin birth and the incarnation at all. And his argument was the incarnation is just as important as resurrection. And I agree with that. But I believe in the veracity of it because I believe in the truth of of the resurrection. I think without the resurrection, I'm Jesus is a good guy kind of a deal. But he took me to task on that. So over the years, I've had times where I have counseled officers with the challenge of what does it have mean for me to be, a personal disciple of Jesus, a commander of others, and the balance or the challenge of how do I live out, orders from above. When I think I mentioned earlier in our time, one of the first times I dealt with that was on the Commandant's Craft in the Hudson. And I've just done a wedding for a 6'5" armored, major of armored cavalry. How he ever fit into a tank, I'll never figure out. But one of the guys came up to me afterwards and said, I don't have a pastor on staff, could we talk? And, I can't support the president's, Reagan at that time's position on nuclear arms. What do I do? And I'm like, I'm a 23-year-old, I'm not even ordained yet, and I'm having a conversation with this guy. So I think, and I appreciate your question, because I do believe many members of the military wrestle with those kind of ethical things. I do know from my friend Margaret, talking to her about her access to flag officers and praying with them and talking with them about those kind of very things. But there are others for whom, it's no issue at all. It's, all one rather than the other. But I think you're right. All right, navigators. I used to use a fair bit of their curriculum back in the day. All right, at the bottom of 131, having embraced the military, evangelicals would find it difficult to articulate a critique of militarism. Over on 132, I think she throws this in for a later chapter. By promoting preemptive war, Walton contributed to a crusade theory of warfare. In war of Christian conquest, righteous states were justified in taking the offense against their enemies. They got upset at Reagan in his second term. But in the end, it was his aggressive posture on the world stage, his penchant for tough talk, and carrying the big stick that seemed to have produced indisputable results. The dominoes would soon begin to fall, but not in the direction conservative evangelicals had long feared. The victory of the free world was something to celebrate, but was also disorienting. Without a common enemy, it would be more difficult to sustain militant expressions of the faith. Crusade theory of warfare endured. Ends justifying the means. All right. Anything else on chapter 7? Chapter 8, War for the Soul. So here, early on in 80, LaHaye sets aside his pastoral ministry, full-time career in political activism. And the thickening web of conservative alliances, Dobson, Falwell, Schlafly, LaHaye, Rushdoony, Phillips, North, Robertson, Kennedy. You all know D. James Kennedy? Is that name familiar? He was a very influential PCA pastor down in Florida.
He just died.
He did, I think. He came up with evangelism explosion. You were to have a question mark on a button in your lapel. And when someone came up and said to you, Rosemary, what's that question mark? you were then given an opportunity to say, if you were to die today, do you know if you go to heaven or to hell? And that was the entry point into the evangelism explosion. And there was a guy who was at seminary with me who come out of that church.
He was on television on Sunday morning, every Sunday.
Yeah, yeah. And had a huge organ in that church.
Diane Bish was the one.
Bish was the organist, and that's another conversation we maybe can have in another time. Yeah, when found out Bish wasn't maybe liking all the guys, yeah.
And talk about flamboyant, oh my lord.
Yeah. Yeah.
Jesse Helms owned a radio and TV station in Durham when we lived there. And I mean, he was on every single afternoon at 5:30 or something, giving an editorial, and he was so bad. He was, but he had power.
Right.
Every single day, he
Right.
was on the station, and I mean, oh goodness.
Right.
he badly.
Yeah, I again, the distribution of the message. In print form, in direct mail form, in new technologies, videos, CDs, in the radio and in television. How that got, taken over. This sense of embattlement on 138. I think this is really kind of important. With Reagan in the White House, the sense of urgency diminished. Together, the tarnished image wrought by the televangelist sex scandals. This led a precipitous decline in donations, notwithstanding the temporary boost North provided. AIDS, I thought this was really interesting. On the bottom of the page was revealed Southern Young Moon's Unification Church was one of LaHaye's largest donors. By the end of Reagan's, I'm over on 136 now, second term, the absence of a common enemy, the power of the Christian right appeared to be ebbing away. Kind of interesting. Sometime in the mid-80s, God had told Pat Robertson to run for president. Thank you, God. Yeah. Campaigning, I'm on that second full paragraph, to restore the greatness of America through moral strength. Okay, so we continue to hear similar messages over time. In fact, in the post-war period in the 50s, there was something called the moral rearmament movement. Any of you remember that? Yeah. That becomes sort of out of the stream kind of as well. Robertson CBN had an estimated annual viewership of 16 million and collected 2.4 million in contributions in '86. His army, I'm over on 137, consisted primarily of charismatics, Pentecostals, and spirit-filled Christians, a subset of white evangelicalism. But he failed to win the support of most evangelicals. Falwell, LaHaye, Kennedy, Robinson, and Dobson all declined to endorse him. This may have been due to a part of professional rivalries, but it also never seemed that Robertson had much of a chance of winning. For those who wanted access to the Oval Office for the next 4 years, backing the establishment candidate seemed a safer bet. But there was also the fact that Robertson's occupation as a clergyman was seen as a detriment. Most evangelicals ended up backing George H.W. Bush. I would commend, by the way, if you've not had a chance to read John Beecham's fine biography of George H.W. Bush. It is, I think, really fine. Evangelical support for Bush was tepid, and the feeling was mutual. Bush, too, lacked the rugged masculinity of his predecessor, but fortunately for him, he was running against Michael Dukakis. Right.
Reagan played
Exactly.
for a football player. Bush
Yeah.
was actually flying airplanes.
And getting shot down. Right. Yeah, I mean, it's a hairbreadth that the guy survived the war. Right? And so here you have what's image and what is fact, and how does image trump fact?
Yeah.
In so many respects.
But fortunately, we don't have that happen anymore, right?
Exactly. And what I want us to look at in this chapter is again, how unbelievably prepared because of his particular career Bush was to be the leader. And yet how he needed to broaden his own political instincts to include a period or this group, and how that became problematic for him. We're gonna see that. All right. The second year of Bush's presidency, in the summer of '90, Iraq invaded Kuwait. Response, the United States forged international coalition to end the Iraqi occupation. This was no Vietnam. I'm over on 138 now. It was a stunning display of American military superiority. Granted, cleanup operations were a little messy. Oil wells burned and Hussein remained in power, but for a time, the taste of renewed American power was accelerated. I felt that personally. I would imagine many of you did as well. Yeah. In '91, the Cold War officially came to an end. More than 4 decades, evangelicals had mobilized against the imminent communist threat. With American power restored and their enemy vanquished, the need for evangelical militarism was no longer self-evident. And again, I would argue for how masterfully both Bush and his foreign policy team managed the fall of the USSR and the fall of the Berlin Wall, so that there wasn't a bloodbath there. And to read that diplomatic history at that time is, I think, American diplomacy at some of its very best. But again, it was quiet. It was behind the scenes. It wasn't saber rattling. It wasn't those things. It was effective. But it managed to get, and you know, again, Carter's top priority was getting all of the people home safely. So, you know, these are very different visions of, you know, a masculine response to international threat. Again, bottom of 138, I think many of you said you weren't aware of Hal Lindsey's book, The Late Great Planet Earth. That was reading for evangelicals in the 70s. And this notion of, you know, European community and Illuminati and Jewish bankers and all of those kinds of stuff. Now, what's interesting here at the bottom is we're going to start to see some cracks in that movement. Ralph Reed, Robertson's Christian Coalition, quickly grew to a more powerful grassroots organization of the religious right. But at the end of the war, Bush's approval rating stood at 89%. That's staggering. But with the recession of 1991, with his reneging on no new taxes pledge, his popularity plummeted, and Pat Buchanan decides he's going to run. And because of that, Bush had to take on this most conservative and most pro-family platform in the history of the Republican Party. And I have friends who were touched by the AIDS scandal or the AIDS epidemic, who cannot say anything good about Bush because of this. Buchanan didn't unseat Bush, but he did shift the Republican Party further to the right. The Cold War may have ended, but the opening night of Republican National Convention, Buchanan declared that a different sort of war had begun. There is a religious war going on in the country, a cultural war, as critical as the kind of nation as the Cold War itself. The war is for the soul of America. Religious right, however, promptly lost the first battle of Buchanan's war. In a three-way race, Bill Clinton emerged victorious over Bush and Ross Perot. Had Bush had been a disappointment for American evangelicals, Bill Clinton appeared to be a disaster. There's a sentence.
But what's curious is that group of people was so willing to overlook the moral decay of their own and yet vilify Clinton. Really, honestly, what's the difference? They were both misbehaving, so to speak.
Really, you notice that there is a difference of hypocrisy in that. Really? Gosh, Janice, that's amazing that you picked that up. Well, and I think on 40 and 41, the animus toward Mrs. Clinton as so powerful. And I can remember when Clinton came in and, you know, the first two major things he tried to do was Hillary on the healthcare, and then the movement of opening up the military. And thinking, wow, those, you know, I understand you need to pass legislation in your early days, but those might not have been the best to take on. But, you know, this Over 141, her book, It Takes a Village, and the pushback, Shaftly pushback on that, you know, is just amazing to me.
I found this section of this chapter the most insightful, just based on what I remember, the experience that I remember, and really having no understanding what was feeding all of that, but buying into the whole notion that these people are crazy. There's no reason to do this, and who do they think they are? And I'm just so grateful. I'm really grateful that we're reading this book, but I'm really grateful that the insight is there. And now I read it and like, well, yay, and go you.
Yeah,
It's tough.
yeah.
I've gotta say, this section, and there were several things in the chapters last week, has given me a real insight on childcare in government. And because I've just been so perplexed while, you know, the 700 million we have in TANF funds isn't going for great childcare.
Right.
And now I get it. But I think it's also so curious that you have all this about parental rights, yet you just had the whole situation with trans children that they're not letting parents and medical professionals make those decisions.
Right.
You know, but the childcare thing has always perplexed me until reading some of this.
And again, there's another stream that I think is underlining some of this, which is purely economic shift. And, you know, blue collar jobs and the displacement of that for white men without college educations and all of that. Have any of you ever read Confederates in the Attic?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I'm reading that as well, you know, because if I'm not reading 6 books at once, it's not a good week for me. But it's touching on some of this feelings about, you know, why do I get into reenacting? Because life was simpler back then, you know, my freedom and states' right. When I hear, you know, all of that about freedom, I mean, what's that coming from? And there's this feeling of being displaced and dispossessed and discounted and all of those kinds of things that are there. But folks don't sort of see, you know, the economics of this.
Right.
And, you know, we're gonna get in a couple of chapters, I think, about the globalization of economy, Walmart comes in and
Yeah.
boy, we like all of the cheap clothing, but boy, there goes, a whole bunch of jobs. How do we, and of course, we haven't found it in the chapter yet, but Bill Clinton's, work on NAFTA. And, what was NAFTA for? It was actually to try to stem the impact of folks coming across, if there are good factories and good jobs in, Mexico and South, then maybe we won't have the migration issue that we're having now, right? That was what was designed for. Oh, we're sending jobs away. Well, how do we deal with that? Yeah.
Guy, there are some comments in the chat box.
Oh, thanks. Chat box. Sure, happy to. Can I pull my mic a little closer? Lakeel has a comment. Looking at the Christian Broadcasting Network at tip top, the webpage is
Oh.
Give Now. Yeah. Lakeel, didn't she also have a, office next to the president? Hillary, is that who you mean? I don't know that, it possibly, she was given a major job, right? And that certainly was problematic because she was his wife and a lawyer and a woman in charge of something. But yeah, I mean, I think it would be fair, Lakeel, to say there might be some willingness to raise concerns over that in the same way that I certainly raised concerns about some of former President Trump's own family in his administration. So.
The other major problem with that is that she was trying to sort out medical care in the country.
Right.
Which we have a huge problem that 25 to 30% of all the funds we spend on medicine go to administration.
Right.
Whereas other countries have 10% on administrative costs.
Right.
But there are a lot of people out there, pharmaceutical firms, medical centers, doctors, who do well with the current system. And this was an impossible task to have. And she was at a very high risk of failure from the very beginning.
Yeah.
And I think that allowed the Christian right to come in on that and attack her for something that she was set up to fail.
Yeah, thank you, Ken. I think that's really helpful. I can't remember if I mentioned it here. But when Ben Sparks was our interim pastor, relatively early on in his ministry, I talked about that. He preached a sermon and talked about, healthcare. Like universal healthcare might be a good thing, something like that. The blowback
Oh.
he got in letters, he came into my office with a letter and he said, really? It was eye-opening. And, I can remember this one person who, begging, please don't bring politics into the pulpit. When I was a teenager, politics came into the pulpit and it split my church and all of this. And Ben said, I put a toe, I didn't put a foot on it, but it was really, it was interesting and eye-opening at that point. And you're right, Ken, it's a challenge, but it is amazing that other countries have figured this out and we're not able to here. Yeah.
Well, you can make a list of things that other countries can do.
Like gun control.
Failing, I'm on the middle of 141, failing to protect national sovereignty wasn't the only way Clinton was undermining the nation's security. The Gulf War briefly reinvigorated narratives of heroic military and American power, but for conservatives, the confidence diminished quickly as Clinton took the helms of commander-in-chief. The don't ask, don't tell policy, evangelicals in the military used material supplied by the Family Research Council, Concerned Women for America, Focused on Family, and Exodus International to oppose opening the military to gay service members. So evangelicals weren't just concerned about gays in the military, they feared the feminization of the military as a whole under Clinton's. All of that, boy, Tailhook and Kelly Flynn and women belonged on a pedestal, not on the field of battle. There you go, gals. Yeah, and this whole UN peacekeeping stuff. What do you think about that? She reminded readers that no man can serve two masters, sending US soldiers as UN mercenaries on phony peacekeeping expeditions like the places like Somalia, Haiti, and Rwanda was unconstitutional, un-American, and unmanly.
Why would you have to listen to what Shackley says? She's just a woman. Right?
The whole UN peacekeeping thing, I was fairly cognizant of what happened in Rwanda. One of my former students was a USAID head of office in Kigali when that went down. And his wife, who was a 6'1" California volleyball player whose father was a Presbyterian minister, they were separated and reunited at the border. And one of the international news agencies got their picture, and that was on the front page of them reuniting on most of the major newspapers around the country. They later came home and wrote a book called Genocide in Rwanda, of what they experienced there. And I remember reading the Canadian head of the UN force there and how their rules of engagement would not allow them to engage. And his feeling of absolute powerlessness and frustration and not being able to intervene in ways that could make a practical difference there. And then, of course, any of us who read, or watched Black Hawk Down, remember, the difficulty in Somalia. But this, this period of how do you, of really international destabilization after the Soviet Union came apart and after the wall fell. I mean, when all of a sudden there's no longer, two great powers, but now the United States is one, how do you use that power? And is the UN one of the ways to do that? Are there limitations to that? All right, then we get the Lewinsky affair.
Wait, you've got this awesome line on 143. Shackley prophesied, Americans can afford to success in a session of TV charlatans and professional liars occupying the White House. I mean, yeah.
I actually had that line underlined, so thank you for bringing it up. Yeah. Yeah. And that whole section. And then we get Dobson and Pat Robertson and Ralph Reed, Character Matter. Meanwhile, Jerry Falwell sent a special edition of weekly reports of more than 160,000 pastors, urging them to call the House to vote for Clinton's impeachment. SBC's Paige Patterson, Al Mohler, and Richard Land signed the letter taking Christian Clinton to task. Those names will become important, more important a little bit later. I did think on the middle of the page, 144, the part that starts with, as the details of the Lewinsky scandal came to light, Clinton's image went from the nude house husband to emasculating Harriet and the swaggering stud muffin. I mean, boy, I don't remember that, but interesting.
But somehow we have to find our way back to this masculinity.
Right.
No matter how weird the
Right.
route is.
Yeah.
It was just creeps me out.
And then it really bothered me on the bottom of that same
Yes.
page. Dobson recommended a healthy skepticism toward
Oh.
certain accusations of domestic violence. And love must be tough. Frankly, that was really hard to read
Oh,
for me.
so disturbing.
Shocked that, you know, the far right, they still came out and said just awful things about Hillary Clinton for standing by him.
Right.
But yet, she was dead in the water, no matter which side she was.
Yeah, that answer went against him.
But,
Go against her.
but all these other, like, oh, you always stand by your man. It's
Right.
like, you know. And I used to drive Dallas to Nashville frequently, and several places on, I don't know if it's I-30 or 40, because it changes in Little Rock. There are huge billboards about, you know, not sparing the rod with disciplining children, huge billboards.
Right.
Those, and then, you know, going to hell, there are a lot of those all along the road.
You know, one of the little Westminster has kind of a tenuous connection to the Clinton family. Do you know that?
No,
So how many remember Ben Kane?
yeah.
Yeah.
Ben's brother swam at Stanford and dated for a little while somebody named Clinton,
Oh,
Chelsea.
Huh?
So he got invited to the inauguration, all those kinds of stuff. And, yeah, then we get into Clarence Thomas. Please tell me, some of you remember the Saturday Night Live sketch about the Hill Thomas hearing. Do any of you remember that?
I remember the hearings, but I remember the hearings.
If you have a chance,
The soda can.
right.
With the pubic hair on.
Well, what I remember about that, so it's, if you get a chance, go Google Saturday Night Live, Clarence Thomas, Anita Hill. And it breaks down to all of these senators or congresspeople asking Thomas for help and how to get dates. It is really one of the, I mean, it is a very good piece of political satire. I, every now and again, will go back and watch it, just to remind myself at how, you know, how Senator Heflin from Alabama, you know, these people, and just how absolutely awful that was. And, the way that, Anita Hill's, you know, person was so, I mean, attacked. What was it? I can't imagine what that would have been like for most of you who were watching that. Just awful.
I have page 145 in the middle. It mentions Christianity Today, which has been mentioned quite a bit in our previous chapters. And I've always thought that was sort of the one magazine you should always read and things. But it doesn't really seem that way from the start.
Yeah, Christianity Today was, I would say, a responsible evangelical magazine. It certainly represented a more evangelical perspective. So the Christian Century is more the mainline magazine. That may be the one you're thinking of, rather than CT. So Christianity Today tended to be more focused on the evangelical. Having said that, there were years that I took it, years that I didn't. And I think that, you know, they've had some exceedingly responsible reporting. If there are many of you podcast listeners,
Yes, yeah.
have you heard of the rise and fall of Mars Hill Church?
Oh, I know that story.
Right, you do. Well, Christianity Today did a 8 or 9 session view of that. And I think it's really one of the best things that I've heard that will also give you insight into this.
I was thinking, I heard when you mentioned Christianity today, didn't they take a stand?
Against Trump.
Several years ago,
They
a
did.
couple of years ago, is that what you're talking
Yeah.
about? I remember it was very controversial and
Right.
they lost a lot of their followers.
Exactly.
But
They,
it's a tough stand and they took it.
yeah, the editor came out and took a stand against Trump and just got eviscerated.
So Christian Century, the editor now is Martin.
Marty's son.
Yeah.
Yeah, Peter Marty. Yeah. Yeah, it's Christian Century, which I haven't seen quoted in here yet, but we may.
I have to get that straight.
Lockheed, I have this microphone so close to me now, it just hit me in the eye. So, all right, this Schlafly, I'm over at 146. Schlafly wasn't buying it. Hill was smart, tough, and quote, perfectly capable of telling a man to button his lip, keep his pants off, get lost, bug off, or just plain no. To Schlafly, the whole thing was just, quote, last minute smear, orchestrated by a feminist mob trying to lynch Thomas. Though few match Schlafly's expressiveness, other leading figures of the Christian life, right, including Weirich, another one to follow, Pat Robertson, Ralph Reed, and Gary Bauer came to Thomas's defense as well. I found the bottom of 146 pretty disturbing. Then we get into, I think, something that is really problematical. Religious, I'm over on 147. We're not the Clinton administration only our loudest critics. Oh my Lord, we're almost finished here. I'm sorry. Rush Limbaugh, the sexist and misogynistic comments about women, feminazis, infobabes, anchorettes, blurring line between news and entertainment. Limbaugh's popularity was clear, but his influence was difficult to discern. Electronic populism threatened to short circuit representative democracy. Boy, underline that line. Bill O'Reilly with Roger Ailes starts Fox with bombastic male commentators sharing the screen with women whose qualifications apparently included sexualized hyperfemininity. Throwback masculinity was at the heart of the network's appeal. They didn't make it in Christianity, but their masculine brand. What did you all think about that? I thought that was a perceptive insight. The fit wasn't a theological one, at least not in terms of traditional doctrine. It was cultural and political. Fox News hawked nostalgic vision of where white men still dominated, where feminists and other liberals were demonized, and where militant masculinity and sexualized femininity offered a vision for the way things ought to be.
Sounds like Tucker Carlson.
Yeah.
The last sentence of that section there is,
Within 2 decades, the influence of Fox News on conservative evangelicalism would be so profound that journalists and scholars alike would find it difficult to separate the two. Exactly. Yeah.
and what do you do about that?
Should we bring back the FCC for its doctrine?
Bye, Mary Ellen.
Wasn't it yesterday that a Louisiana, judge, I don't think I can explain it, but he's prohibiting governmental agencies, FBI, et cetera, from, calling, and the CDC from calling out, disinformation. It's huge. It was, I read it this
I didn't see it.
in a Heather Cox Richardson,
Yes.
piece,
Well, she's a noted, you know,
oh my God, she's amazing.
yeah.
It's really pretty scary.
Well, listen, our time is over. I apologize for running a little bit long. I'll be here next week. The week after that, I'm gone, and Claire Berry will facilitate the class. And then the 27th, I've been asked to go and be part of the opening of the new high school that's west of us.
Another one, Bellevue.
And I'm gonna need,
Old Hillwood High School.
Right.
yeah, Lawson High School. And Jackie Shrego asked me to be part of that, so I'm gonna need to find one of you who'd be willing to take the class that day. I'll reach out to Carol Busey to see if she's available. I'll also ask Stephanie Boaz if she might be, but if they're not available, one of you might have that opportunity on the 27th, so thanks.
We have one thing, we have a card for for Stephen John, Bartek the fifth was born.
He was, Clint. And we actually have, I got word that Meredith Lawrence had her baby.
Okay.
And there's another baby supposed to be born today. I
We have
think.
3 babies. Next week we'll have cards for 3 new babies.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
little boomlet.
Yeah.
Grace, yes,
Future reference. I think this information is correct. There's a movie called The Source. Now that I'm questioning my title, but it's about the man last name Carroll, who wrote the book that we did here before you came.
Constantine Sword.
Yes, Constantine Sword. Oh, it's not called, the movie is called The Sword. And it explains that incident at the Air Force Academy. And I was so unaware of it and so shocked when I saw that. I couldn't believe it really happened in our country.
Right.
It was just appalling, and I don't even know the date of it, but it's worth seeing if you have a chance.
Grace and peace all, thanks.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you working through this book with me.
Yeah.
I do too.
Bye you out there in Etherland. How's Maine, Sheppy? Hot?
Yes, it's hot here. It's 80. I think it's going to be 80 degrees today or 86.
Are you gonna have to turn on your air conditioning?
Yeah, I had it on last night. But I usually just turn it on and then the room gets cool and then I go to bed and it's all right all night. But it's going to be hot for the next week and a half at least. And whenever I talk to my son, he says, Mom, global warming is here. You have to understand it's here. I told you it was coming. And I mean, it is bad. It's bad. We had a lot of days of rain and now we've got, fortunately, the ground is wet. So it's really, really hot.
Have a good day.
I'm not usually in sleeveless shirts when I'm in Maine, so you know it's hot. And I haven't got the